Do you remember your first video game crush? I do. It was from the Resident Evil franchise, Rebecca Chambers from the original game. I don't know what it was, it might have been the outfit style, or it might have just been that live action intro, but I was just enamored with Rebecca every time I would play that original game, both on the PS1 and later on the DS. Hilariously enough, she got her own game back on the GameCube, and I never got around to playing it. By the time the HD remaster came out, I tried to play it on a portable computer, but that didn't work out too well. The frame rate was bad. So I decided to wait until it came to a proper handheld, and now it has. Here is my review of Resident Evil 0 HD Remaster for the Nintendo Switch. Zero takes place right before the first game happened, in the Arklay Mountains not too far from the famous mansion. The STARS Bravo team lands near a train where they find that a military convict has escaped capture. Once aboard the train, rookie STARS medic Rebecca Chambers finds that very criminal, and both of them are surrounded by strange viral leeches, zombies, and more. Finding themselves trapped on that train, Rebecca and Billy decide to work together to get out of that mess before they worry about who's a police officer and who's a criminal. The story of Zero isn't bad. It does offer a little bit of insight into the events of the first game, as well as some background info on Wesker and Birkin from Resident Evils 1 and 2, but overall the story is very confusing. The backstories of the main characters are well done, but once you get to the end of the game and the real point of what's going on is shown to you, it just gets very confusing and convoluted, especially with how quickly it's thrown at you and how quickly it's tossed away for the end of the game. And that's not even getting into all of the conflictions between how Rebecca is in this game and how she is in the first game. When it comes to gameplay, this is a fixed camera survival horror game with shooting and puzzle elements thrown into the mix. Like a lot of the other classic Resident Evil games, you're going to be wandering around areas, backtracking, and collecting items so you can solve puzzles to open up the path to the next area. First of all, this is Zero HD Remaster, and the jump in price between $20 and $30 for the Switch version actually does make a little bit of sense here. On other platforms, you have to pay $20 for the base game and another $10 at least for a bunch of extra costumes that released with that remaster. However, all of those costumes are built into the Switch version, so it's basically the same price you'd pay on other platforms. And it's even got all of the trophies and achievements from the other game built in, and they unlock and show up on your screen when you complete them. Progression in Zero is very similar to the other older games because outside of the introduction stage at the train, you're basically going through a huge hub world with interconnected areas, constantly backtracking and solving new puzzles to open up new paths. It also incorporates a lot of the gameplay features from the older games, like limited item management, using ink ribbons to save your data, and showing those door opening transitions when you go between rooms. What Zero did that was new was adding a cooperative system where you can constantly switch back and forth between Billy and Rebecca, and each of them have different strengths that allow them to do different things. For example, Rebecca is the only one that can mix substances together to make some key items, and Billy is the only one who's able to move and push around crates. You can also give the partner that you're not controlling AI commands like being idle or being able to attack enemies in the room with you. But there is a bit of a flaw in this system. When your partner is following you and you move through a room too quickly, or your partner starts attacking an enemy and you leave the room, they're not going to go with you even if they're sat to follow you. So you get a call for help, have to go back to the previous room, recollect them, probably kill some enemies, and then try to leave again. In all honesty, the flaws made themselves so apparent that when I got to the factory level where Billy isn't around and you're only controlling Rebecca, it was a lot more comfortable because I didn't have to worry about constantly keeping track of my other character. My other main gripe is the item inventory system. You have a limited number of items that you can carry for each character, which is classic Resident Evil. And you've got a bunch of items that you can collect that use up more than one slot. Most weapons use 2 slots, and some key items also use 2 slots. The big problem here with this is a specific key item and the fact that you don't have any storage boxes. In games like Resident Evils 1 and 2, you have storage boxes in every save room where you can store your inventory and take it out whenever you need it. But there are no storage boxes in this game, so if you need item inventory and you need to get rid of something, you drop it where it is and it stays there until you go back and collect it. And there is only one item in the game that makes this system frustrating: the hookshot. It takes up 2 slots and you have to use it for story progression in 3 of the major areas across almost the entire game. Meaning you've got to constantly remember to take it with you when you go from area to area until its final use is done when you're almost completely finished. And if you ever forget where you dropped it and need it again, you're gonna have to look for it until you find it. Now let's get out of these systems and into the core Resident Evil mechanics. Combat works pretty well. It's very similar to the old Resident Evil games where you could basically only aim forward, up, and down, but Zero does add a nice auto aim feature which makes it a whole lot easier to fight enemies, and the controls giving you options to use the analog stick to move in any direction instead of classic tank controls helps it as well. You still got to adjust to how this game plays, but it is much better than some of the older games. Now let's get into content and length, which this game has a decent amount of, but not nearly as much as some other games like Resident Evil 4. My first run through normal in Resident Evil 0 took me about 10 to 12 hours, and by the time I'd messed around in the Leech Hunter minigame and gone through Wesker mode, I'd easily hit 16 to 17 hours. Now let's dive into presentation, which is pretty good for the most part. The in-game graphics look great, there aren't any jagged edges and there's a lot of detail, but some of the CG cutscenes are just like the Resident Evil 4 Assignment Ada cutscenes where they're very blurry and look very unpolished, especially compared to the rest of the game. And performance is mostly good as well. There were a couple rooms where the frames dropped a little bit, but overall it remained pretty steady for the entire experience. Now let's get into battery life, which I was thinking was going to be pretty decent, especially after what I saw of Resident Evil 4. Resident Evil 0 has a battery range of 2 hours and 40 minutes on high settings, up to 3 hours and 37 minutes on low settings. Now in conclusion, the origin of the Resident Evil franchise brings more zombie killing to the handheld world and pretty optimized as well. Now on the downside, the partner and item systems are still pretty flawed and you're gonna have to do quite a bit of adjusting to get used to the controls. It's certainly a fun horror game and I loved finally seeing Rebecca in her own game, but it's definitely far from the series' best. Reviews to Go rates Resident Evil 0 for the Nintendo Switch a 7.5 out of 10. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below. Thanks for watching and have a great day.